Okay, good night. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Apologize for the late start again. Okay, we're going to try to, it's a topic of ambitious topic to look at some contemporary tshuvot or contemporary approaches to organ donation. Particularly, we're going to focus on heart and etc., or the organs that are donated from deceased donors that depend on the brain death criterion for determining death, as we discussed last time. Last time we looked at some old halachic sources that indicate that independent breathing seems to be a sign of life. The cessation of independent breathing would indicate death. We saw Talmudic passages as understood by medieval sources that indicate that and support that. But all of the, and if you recall, that was okay. That's on YouTube now if you missed it. But what do we do with sort of in modern times? This all gets more complicated, really, with the invention of ventilators, which can allow somebody who is not capable of breathing on their own to continue to have it's not really breathing, but they're being breathed, they're being ventilated, and the heart can continue to beat for some additional time. And that's a function of the mid-20th century, and that creates all sorts of ethical questions and halachic questions as well. Heart transplantation began in the late 60s. It was not successful in the sense it didn't really reliably prolong the life of the recipient until the 1980s with the development of effective immunosuppressants. Before the development of immunosuppressants, nobody really lived very long with a donated heart. With immunosuppressants, and so that also creates an interesting dynamic, because the earliest tshuvot on heart transplants were from a time before they were actually effective. So we have a couple of tshuvot by Moshe Feinstein in which he condemns heart transplants in very strong terms, but he says the death sentence, you're killing two people. You're killing the donor and the recipient. So some take that to mean, he says you're killing the donor, so he must not be accepting brain death criterion. But on the other hand, he's also writing about a time where nobody was living, after these transplants. And then he did live into the 80s, and he did actually permit people to receive heart transplants, but he never wrote that explicitly in writing. So his last tshuvah on heart transplants was written in 1976, which is still before they were really actually effective in prolonging life. That really came in some years later.
So it's a question of if they can accept one?
Well, because you're not. There's a whole halachic question of whether or not you're allowed to engage in risky surgery. That maybe it'll extend your life a little bit, but it might,
even if they know that he's going to die otherwise.
Yeah, so you'll die. You have your heart failure. You might live another 2 weeks, or you might live another 2 months, or a year or two, or many years maybe. But you're in heart failure. But if you do the surgery, you'll definitely die in a matter of days or weeks, right? Because it's why would you? That was. Yeah, there's a whole range of tshuvot about halachic material from the Gemara as well about whether you're allowed to risk your life in order to potentially prolong your life, right? Can you do that, or to save someone else's life? And that's a whole other series of topics. So I thought we'd look at do a close read, at least of some sections of some of Moshe Feinstein's writings on this. Again, because he did write during the time when organ donation existed, and he wrote about it. And a closer read, and that's the sort of supporters of organ donation and heart transplants in particular have, relying on the fact that he endorsed it in practice, if not in writing, have sort of teased out from his writings sort of implicit acceptance of some of the core halachic principles that wouldn't lead to accepting organs. So we'll look at that. There's a very, very good analysis, and I don't know, Shul has 3 copies of this book. Hopefully 3 of you take them home. We bought them years ago, and I don't remember what the context was or why, but so hopefully, if you're interested, it has a series of very good essays on brain death.
I think you were selling them, because I bought one, so I don't
remember
why.
Somebody didn't buy.
I don't remember why you were selling it, though. I think someone came to speak or something.
I think the Shul sponsored the publication, and then also Volume 2. And the way it worked, the way you sponsored it, so the publisher gave us many copies. So then we were selling them back to people. But
I've already bought a bunch of books that you recommended. So this one, I'm just going to take.
Okay. So Volume 2, I think we got rid of all of them. I don't know where Volume 2 is, but Volume 1 we still have some. Volume 2 is specifically on organ donation. Volume 1 is about brain death criterion, which is also really about organ donation. So there's a very good article by Daniel Reifman. I don't know if you know Rabbi Daniel Reifman. Very, very good halacha teacher, and very, very close read of these Tshuvot of Rav Moshe Feinstein, which is sort of informing some of what I'm doing, but it's a very, very clear read. It's not a very long article. You could read it in the Shabbos afternoon and come away with a really, really strong appreciation, at least of Rav Moshe Feinstein's perspective. And the essay includes the text that he's analyzing in Hebrew and English, so you can really read it in a very, it was well written and well edited and put together well. And some other essays in it that are very good as well. I'd say the other thing that I have here, which I think is also worth sort of looking at, this was a rabbinic statement in January 2011, which was sort of trying to kind of push back and defend brain death criterion and organ donation in the aftermath of a little bit of a kind of a shifting pivot. The pendulum was shifting away from embracing organ donation, at least in the centrist Orthodox community in North America, and this was an attempt to kind of shore up that perspective. And you can see this was back when I signed rabbinic letters, so you can tell I signed it at the time. You can see it's a little bit like a snapshot in time of who were rabbis in 2011 and where we all lived. Anyway, so we'll get to that too, I think. All right, so this was 1968. This is Rav Moshe Feinstein's first tshuva, and this is Daniel Reichman's translation. Regarding the question of a heart transplant for a sick person, where some doctors have begun to perform, I don't want to write at length what proofs and rationales analysis for this would be counterproductive. It would imply that this matter requires proofs, because it's not straightforward, and people will come to be lenient by saying that one could challenge some of these proofs, and even if such challenges are worthless, they will have already weakened the force of the law, since people will say that the rabbis are divided on this issue, and therefore one may be lenient, God forbid. Therefore, I set the issue forth here clearly and succinctly. So he's going to say, I'm not going to write a real tshuva, because if I write a real tshuva, you might think it's debatable. Because you might disagree with my arguments. Once I give arguments, you might disagree with me. Okay? Or people say, oh, it's like a matter of dispute. The rabbis dispute, so maybe it's okay. And I think I'm so against it, I'm not even going to explain why I'm against it. Okay? The heart transplantation that some doctors have begun to perform recently is absolutely the murder of two individuals, where they actively killed the heart donor, who's still alive, not only according to Torah law, but which gives the standard of death, and even according to the words of the doctors, among whom there are those who tell the truth that the donor is still alive, but due to their wickedness, they give no concern to his life, which is only of a short duration, or might even last a few days. And they also actively kill the heart disease patient himself in robbing him of several years or even decades worth of life. For it's known that many patients with heart disease live for many years, but upon removing his heart and transplanting him another person's heart, all of them have died shortly thereafter, most of them within hours, some of them within a few days. And even that one in Africa who's still alive for some 6 months, based on what I've heard, they agree he won't survive. Okay, so he survived 19 months. Okay, that's the end. So a little footnote here. Okay, this was Philip Blayberg. Okay, he lived for 19 months with a donated heart. This is the response to them should be publicized in language nowhere no less. Okay, that's it. So that's what he was to say. And then, so then he goes on. Then he says a little bit more. But really against it. But again, this is just to understand the medical. There wasn't even a there was not a uniform medical standard of death in 1968. So I think there were updates on the medical consensus of what. Brain death standards didn't exist among doctors in 1968. That had to be devised. The standards for determining it had to be devised much later. And so that's why he's saying, the doctors are also saying he's alive, because there wasn't really a medical standard by which this person was definitely dead. That the recipients might have lived much longer had they not had the transplant. That maybe is true, but not, I don't think people who it was likely they would live for years were undergoing this sort of experimental surgery. That doesn't seem very likely, but I can imagine only very desperate people would undergo this type of surgery, I would think, but it's probably didn't prolong their lives, or probably shortened their lives for the first number of months, or some number of surgeries have probably shortened their lives, or the length of it. I read one, in the history of it's the doctor who pushed it was a bit of a maverick, and I think the ethical questions are not so simple, right? If I do this procedure and we get good at it, then 5 or 10 years from now, or even 5 or 10 months from now, it'll be really great for people, but in the meantime, the first few people that I'm experimenting on, they'll probably won't survive the surgery, or if they do, they won't live it, right? It's it's a murky ethical, it's ethically complicated, I'll say that much, right? I don't know, right? It seems, I think a lot of medicine progressed in that way, and Rav Moshe is against that for sure.
I think to some extent also, it's, like you said, the people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the people at the beginning who were getting the surgery were going to die.
Yeah,
So, and we're likely gonna die within some relatively short period, because
yeah.
the doctor says, oh yeah, you'll have another 5 to 10 years.
You're not gonna do a surgery
You're not
like that.
gonna do it.
Yeah.
So, from a halachic standpoint, like, that's one thing, but from an ethical standpoint, I think you've got potentially more ground to stand on at that point.
Well, I guess, so I think, so like what's the prognosis? The prognosis is you could live another 6 weeks, 6 months. Would you do surgery that could give you, right? I don't know, all right, yeah.
So, I have two questions. One, it kind of sounds like experimental, sort of like for research purposes or for trial purposes, that Ramesh is saying heart transplant is still like very experimental. You can't shorten your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But broaden that a little bit. Is it just surgery or is it all like procedural? Like if you have stage 4 cancer and there's a research, program or research opportunity, is that also not allowed? Because like you very well could get a treatment that both doesn't work, or you could get a treatment that maybe works, but
Yeah.
could be short, like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
so that is a halachic topic, which I think,
I think now,
Yeah.
in terms of transplants, like the medicine and technology is a lot more advanced.
Yes.
So like it's not a question. You're not listed for a heart transplant unless it will prolong your life, or it will reasonably.
Yes.
It will be reasonably thought to prolong your life. But certainly, like in the 60s, that was not clear.
Yeah.
So I can totally understand their response at that point.
but you're saying
But
even now there are other,
very experimental treatments
Yeah.
and modalities in medicine
yeah.
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think it's, I think there has to, I would say there should be, even from a medical ethics perspective, there must be some likelihood that it would prolong the life of the candidate in the trial, or else they wouldn't do it, right? I think if ever so.
Well, that's what
so.
they're trying to find out.
Right.
Like during the trial.
Yeah,
Right.
it's,
They don't know, but I think they assume it's likely,
They
right?
think that it will, but.
Yeah.
there's, it's a question when you go for antibody treatment for cancer, for tumors,
Mhm.
that they say when you go, it has to be terminal, and you have to cease all other treatment in order to do this trial, and we have a very low success rate.
Mhm.
That said, the success rate, the people who live, they're done with fatal brain cancer. But they said, but the success rate is so low because we don't know how to use these drugs yet, and we're not allowed to use them until you cease chemo and radiation. You'll probably just die while you're waiting for the drug to work.
Mm.
And people do die from the drug because they don't know what dose to give it. On the other hand, it's gotten people with terminal cancer cured. So you have to weigh, as a patient, do you want to go there and potentially just die while you're on the study?
Right, but the options are they're not good options.
Yeah,
Because,
not all of them are
if
bad
If
op-
the chemo was working, then they wouldn't be in that
If you
situation.
go and apply to one of these studies, they're very honest
Mhm.
about all of the different options of what could happen.
Yeah, I assume these heart surgeons were honest. I would
Yeah.
hope these were also honest in the 60s as well, but Ramosha felt that was not it came from devaluing, to write off this. You'll likely live 2 more weeks, right? You could do a lot in 2 more weeks, but for the sake of this surgery, which will, most likely, you won't wake up from the surgery, right? That's.
But did they take it out of living?
No, they took it out.
Conscious individuals?
No, of course not. No, they took it out of brain dead people, but the criterion for brain death weren't established or weren't rigorous back then, right? They weren't. It was a new standard, right? ICUs were just invented, right? The idea that it existed was relatively new.
It's not like an odd concept of a triathlon in humans in which a person is going to live for less than 12 months, and while you're not allowed to kill it, it's not.
Oh, maybe, but that wouldn't be. I don't think he gets into that here. I don't think that's. If you murder a trait, it's not going to. Yeah. Mhm.
I feel like if anything that supports this, that like if he's gonna die within 12 months, then from the transplant, then like,
Then what?
then he shouldn't
Do
receive
it.
the transplant.
Yeah. But that was everyone. But that was everyone, right? That was everyone, right?
Right.
I'm saying that if
right.
somebody's going to die within 12 months anyway, then
Generally,
You're not
generally somebody, you're not allowed to hasten the death of anyone, even somebody who's actively dying.
No, you're not decent, but I don't think it's like as big of like a prohibition.
I don't think it's a capital offense if you murder a treifa. You never know who's a treifa
So
is.
the thing is, if you can save someone's life while not actually doing a capital offense,
I don't think
you're
it.
allowed to do that.
No, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do that. So you can't, you're definitely not allowed to do that. Even if it's not a capital offense, doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. But yeah, that's important. Okay. What? No. It's definitely halachically you're allowed to. Just because you don't kill use for it doesn't mean it's allowed, right? Ruth,
Little circling back to something previously, is there any halachic precedent in terms of putting so obviously pikuach nefesh, in pursuit of your own saving a life, are you allowed to put yourself at risk?
That's also that's a question. It's a big halachic question to the extent to which you're allowed to risk your life to save your life, because we value chayesha, we value like temporary, short-term life, and so you're allowed to like put that at risk in order to gain like a normal lifespan.
It seems like we also value a full life, a normal life as well.
Yeah. But we also value temporary life. So generally, there's a strong halachic sort of hesitancy. I don't feel comfortable like speaking about the topic, but it exists. There are lots of tshuvot about it. It's the Gemara, and there are contemporary tshuvot about the right to whether or not one has the right to risk your life in order to save your life, or certainly to save someone else. It's complicated. So I don't feel Let's look at page 2. You have another tshuva from 1970 regarding what the doctors say, that indications of life and death are found in the brain, that according to their assessment, the brain isn't functioning, the patient is considered dead even if he's still breathing. So this is now they're talking about, this is not about heart transplants, but brain death per se, at the bottom of page 2 in the right-hand column. The truth is that cessation of brain function isn't death, since as long as one is breathing, he's considered alive. Rather, the cessation of brain function is what causes death, since the patient will stop breathing. And it's possible, since he's still alive before respiration actually ceases, there are types of drugs, either of those that are known to man or that are as of yet unknown, that would cause the brain to function again. Therefore, it's clear that one who kills such an individual is a murderer and liable for capital punishment. For neither the Talmud or the poskim mention that indications of life are found in the brain. It's not possible to say that nature has changed, for even in the time of the sages, the brain worked as it does now, and all human life depended on it. And even so, one wasn't considered dead upon cessation of brain function, so it's clear the same is true in our time. So he seems to be rejecting the brain as being relevant for determining life, and yet, if you read it carefully, what he's actually saying is that if his brain, the brain isn't necessary for life because the breathing is what determines life, but the breathing is controlled by the brainstem. When he's referring to as brain function, it seems he's thinking about so the cerebral functioning, something like that, some sort of consciousness or cerebral functioning, but brainstem functioning, which enables breathing, is really different. So it seems like, so even though on the surface it seems that he's rejecting the brain as being relevant for, brain function as being relevant for determining life, what he's like doubling down on is the ability to breathe, which is controlled by a more basic part of the brain. And so it's true, consciousness could be lacking and somebody's still alive, but the brainstem needs to function for somebody to be breathing. Let's.
Do you know
Yeah.
when there was a formalized standard for brain death?
I forget. I was reading it this afternoon. I don't remember. But there were several. But I don't remember. I forget. I'm sorry.
Not that long ago.
Yeah, and it was updated relatively, like 2010, 28. It was like updated relatively recently. But the Harvard criterion, I think, were in the 80s. I think that was for a long time, like the goal.
I also was going to say that.
You think what?
I was going to say early 90s.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it was recent.
Yeah. Okay, let's move ahead. Let's look on page 5. We have another one here. This is 1976. Okay. In the matter of determining when the individual is considered dead, it's stated explicitly in the Gemara in Yuma that we read, if a building collapsed on an individual that we clear the heap even on Shabbat and cover enough to examine his nose, for if they didn't detect any life by checking his breathing, he's considered dead. But even if the breathing is very shallow, he's considered alive, and one can detect this with a feather or a thin piece of paper placed by the nose, but if it doesn't move, he's assumed to be dead. But they must perform this examination several times, as I explained in and explain the words of the Rabbi who wrote that one must wait a short time in case the deceased has only fainted, meaning the amount of time would be impossible to survive without breathing. Okay, not that he's going to stop, right? Okay. All this in reference to terminally ill patients who don't require a ventilator, but there are patients who can't breathe independently and are placed on ventilators, which enable them to breathe even if they are already dead, since artificial breathing doesn't render one alive. Regarding such patients, if there are no other indications of life, but the patient seems completely unresponsive, even to a pinprick, like the state referred to as a coma, as long as the ventilator is attached, it's forbidden to remove it from his mouth, lest he's still alive, and this will kill him. But if the ventilator stops working, because the oxygen runs out, as the ventilator uses oxygen tanks, which needs to be replaced, they shouldn't put it back in his mouth for a short time, approximately 15 minutes, at which point, if he's no longer alive, he will have stopped breathing and they can be certain that he's dead. But all this is in reference to people suffering from a disease. Okay, that, by the way, that's not done anymore, okay, right? These, if you still, like this was like classic halachic, you can't turn off, somebody who's not, you can't turn off the ventilator, you can just not replace the oxygen tanks in between, because that's, you can withhold active intervention to enable somebody to die, moving, right? So just don't replace the tanks. So I don't know when ventilators in hospitals last had tanks. It was a very long time ago. But I have a, my friend who tells me that Rabbi still works in a hospital, and rabbis still say, oh, just don't don't switch the tanks. The tank runs out. Because they read about that from the 70s. And it's just not. Hospitals have oxygen coming out of the walls. There's no tank, right? So that's not right. So they have other methods.
But we do similar things.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, it's not specific.
Correct. Yes.
Like what?
Like not escalating ventilator support, like the settings.
If they're requiring more oxygen, you don't
Right,
want
like
it
if
up.
your blood is more acidotic, you have to crank up all your settings in order to make your blood, less acidotic, and so you won't go into cardiac arrest. So you just won't escalate care,
Okay.
which will allow the body and the
Yeah.
blood and the brain to.
Yeah. So that's like the modern equivalent for a modern
So
hospital
also,
like this.
someone
Yeah.
who has a DNR, or just,
That's
They're
for
just not gonna
usually
live.
religious families that
oh.
don't want to remove support, so we just don't escalate. So you just say, we're parked where we are, whatever happens, happens. And so we'll peel it away when you're in a safe spot, and then it just won't escalate further.
Yeah. Or we differentiate between the air, the ventilate, the oxygen, the oxygen level in the atmosphere is 40% or something, so you can reduce the oxygen level to
Anyway,
21?
yeah.
Ooh, okay, never mind. You lower the oxygen level to match the level in the air, and that, because the extra that's above 21% is considered that's more like a medical intervention as opposed to basic breathing that you're supporting. And so you can lower the oxygen level to until it gets to, so it's another technique you will do. But all this is in reference to people suffering from a disease, but regarding those who are injured in a car accident or fall from a window and the like, it may occur that they can't breathe due to the contraction of the nerves of the lungs and respiratory organs, but after breathing for some time, it means a ventilator, these contracted nerves will expand and they will begin to breathe independently. Regarding these individuals, if they can't breathe independently and no other indicator of life are visible, it's possible they're still not considered dead, right? You can have somebody on a ventilator who's alive, right? So it's like a bit of, for example, right, somebody who has polio, right, can't breathe without a ventilator. They're very much alive, right? Somebody who has some condition that's preventing them from breathing, not a brain injury, but a nerve injury in their lungs, that controls their lungs, that person is very much alive. And since you say that there's now a test which expert doctors can determine by means of injecting a radioactive nucleotide solution into, that's added by the okay, so which is a radioactive nucleotide solution to the blood vessels, where the connection between the brain and the body has been severed. For if the radioactive solution doesn't reach the brain, it's clear that the brain has no more bearing on the body, and also the brain is lysed completely, liquefied as it were, and it's as if the head was forcibly severed from the body. If so, we must be stringent with such a patient such that even if he's completely unresponsive, even to a pinprick, and if he doesn't breathe independently at all, we may not determine that he's dead until they perform this test. If they see that there is a connection between the brain and the body, even if he's not breathing, they should put the ventilator in the mouth even for a long time. And only when they determine by means of this test that there is no longer a connection between the brain and the body, then they may determine based on the lack of independent respiration that he's dead. This seems to be a very strong endorsement of a brain death criterion. So he's not talking about heart transplants in this tshuva. He's talking about just whether someone's alive or not. He's saying breathing is not sufficient it's not alone sufficient to determine if someone's alive or dead, because people could have an injury that is curable even, or just a lung injury, lung trauma, lung nerve trauma that could compromise their breathing, and that person should stay on a rest rate forever. But if the brain functioning is gone, the isotopes are supposed to, right, they see the blood circulating, they see the blood isn't going into the brain, right? They put the radioactive isotopes that circulates through your body, I guess they see it doesn't go into your brain, they determine the brain is basically, as far as blood flow is concerned, severed from your body because of traumatic pressure in the brain, whatever, the blood's not reaching it. And so in that case, the fact that person's not breathing indicates that their brain isn't, the brainstem isn't functioning, it's as though their head is severed, and that person is considered dead. So he's endorsing a standard of brain death here. I think it's pretty clear. Yes?
I mean, I don't know much about how much of your brain needs to be alive in order for you to live on a ventilator and a respirator, on life support, but I assume it's some percentage.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think though breathing is one of the most basic functions of the brainstem, and if you can't breathe without a ventilator, I'm not sure that there's much left.
I mean, the heart doesn't run independently of the brain.
The heart runs somewhat independently of the brain because doesn't the heart have its own pacemaker?
Oh, okay.
Right?
So
the little heart cells will beat in a Petri dish, right?
So they theoretically you could have a beating heart on a pacemaker. You could theoretically be on life support and the brain is completely dead.
Yeah, I think there's I think they told with Shlomo and Arbach something about like a sheep that was decapitated, that they kept it, it was like, I don't know if this happened or not, but that's like, so in theory you can imagine, yes.
It happened with a chicken.
What?
Yeah, there was a chicken who lived for like a year without a head. It's like a thing.
What, it still had its
I mean, I once saw a chicken run without a head.
No, that's not,
I was told it's like someone fed food, I was told that once. I heard this. I'm not sure how true it is.
Okay, the famous story of the chicken without a heart? That's also kind of relevant in this discussion. The story of the chicken without a heart? The famous, it's so famous, there's actually a book that was published this year called The Chicken Without a Heart about the story. This is like roiled Europe for like, this is like one of the most important halakhic controversies of modern times. There was a chicken, a woman was cooking a chicken, and as she's butchering the chicken, she notices that it has no heart, which she thought, she thought maybe this chicken is a treifa chicken because it doesn't have a heart. It's missing like this vital organ. It must be a treifa. The rabbi said, the cat ate the heart. Like you were like cutting up this chicken. The cat was like in the kitchen with you. The cat ate the heart because the chicken couldn't have lived without a heart. And he said the chicken was kosher because it clearly had a heart, and you just missed it because it wouldn't have been alive without a heart. And so this became like this major Chacham Tzvi is the one who permitted the chicken. This became a very, very controversial halakhic issue relating to medicine and halakha and science, and whether we're going to use like our sort of rational scientific understanding to influence our study of halakha and our halakhic lives, and it became a major, major issue. But it gets brought into these debates as well because Chacham Tzvi says the heart is so important, and that it is important, but not necessarily as in the way that we're using it here. So yeah.
I agree with the chicken thing.
Yeah.
So apparently, it lived 18 months without a head, but like a small part of its head, which had the brainstem, stayed. It wasn't.
There you go. Okay.
But apparently it's in the U.S. It's a famous case for 18 months.
Okay, so if you want to read about the chicken without a heart, that's like a famous halachic.
The chicken ended up without most of its head.
It's called like Mike the Headless Chicken, so you can Google it. But like I think they used an axe and they missed something.
Okay.
I don't know. So it says.
Malika got wrong. Okay, so in the 21st century, so you have a number of poskim who Moshe Feinstein endorsed organ donation. So his son-in-law, Moshe Tendler, who just died a year ago or so, was Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law, and who I think was also a biologist and very strong advocate of brain death criterion and organ donation, and said, my father-in-law told me that it was okay and actually advised that it was possible and really strongly pushed for it. Others, based on some of his other interpretations of his writings, were much more restrictive. And I'd say, in the 2010s, the sort of pendulum was shifting away from endorsing brain death. There was certainly not a lot of organ donation practiced from dead donors in the Orthodox community. Reached a point where the state of Israel was excluded from international organ donor conventions because Israelis were donating so few organs. Because in Europe they kind of share organs between countries so closely together. So Israelis were donating so few organs, but we're asking for them. So we're just not going to give you organs anymore because you're just giving so few, which is obviously not great on many levels. So in 2011, this position, and that's around when this book was published, was all trying to push back against this pendulum swing away from organ donation. Yeah.
Why? What was going on with the pendulum?
Culturally, I don't know. That's a good question.
It's good to be strict.
Maybe it's just the general policy being mach. You know, I think one position that emerged is that, you know, it's machloket. You know, is the person alive or not? I'll be safe. I'm not gonna, you know, like the Rosh says in that first tshuva. If it's a dispute, you know, then like why I'll be, you know, then like the rabbis are divided. Well, you're not going to put your dear beloved, pull them off life support if like some rabbis think he's still alive and some rabbis think it's murder to take him off life support and donate his organs. I'm not gonna sign that card if there are rabbis who are against it. And then on the flip side, if you need the organ, you think, well, some rabbis say it's fine, so of course I'll sign up to receive organs. So you have this like very problematic dynamic of entire communities accepting organs but not donating them.
I think there's also some hold there's a halachic issue donating your organs to like non-Jews, and some obviously hold otherwise, but some
I'm not aware of that. That shouldn't be an issue. Pituach nefesh shouldn't really
but it's not necessarily
shouldn't really matter. It shouldn't really matter. Maybe people culturally feel that way. And then,
so for some, I guess, I would say like probably the ultra-Orthodox, so like it excludes a large part of Israel's population from donating organs.
they don't want to donate because they can't control who they give it to. I don't know.
I
Yeah.
remember like hearing about this in Israel. Like,
Maybe. So you might have heard that. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I think it could just be trying to be machmir on both sides. So, you know, like if somebody you love needs an organ, of course you're going to sign up for it because some people say it's mutter. And if someone you love is on life support, and you might be hesitant to donate their organs because some folks are going to say it's not, it's permissible, right? So you're just going to sort of be strict and careful. You end up with this really problematic dynamic. So I thought this statement was interesting because it sort of stands it doesn't really debate the halakha positions. It sort of makes a kind of pragmatic and kind of ethical argument. So we, the undersigned Orthodox rabbis and Rosh Yeshiva, affirm the following principles with regard to organ donation and brain stem. First and foremost, the halakhic definition of death is a long-standing debate amongst Gedolei HaPoskim, and it should not be forgotten that among others in the U.S. and Israel, and the former chief rabbis of Israel, Rabbi Avram Shapira, and Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, Zichron Lebracha, and Yibedel Chaim Uvidaido Schwartz, who, since, you know, Zichron Lebracha, you have based in the debates of America, are proponents of the position that brain stem death constitutes the halakhic definition of death. Okay, so don't snub these great poskim by thinking that when you're evaluating this debate. Both positions that brain stem death constitutes death and that only cardiac death can define death are halakhically viable. This remains so even in light of the findings of the President's Council on Bioethics in 2000. I don't know about the President's Council on Bioethics in 2008. It's but I'm sure you can look it up and figure out. And maybe it also played some role. This was still during the Bush years, and there was a lot of religiously influenced medical ethics stuff that happened then, which was just a little bit restrictive and conservative. It was, do you remember there was a stem cell limit, research stuff? Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember?
Ban on cloning.
Cloning, yeah. With regard to this long-standing debate, its critical implication of organization, we affirm our position. 1. Brain stem death is a halakhically operational definition of death. As such, organs may be removed for transplantation under strict halakhic supervision and guidance. Okay, very nice. 2. In light of the serious moral issues and profound life-saving potential presented by the possibility of organ donation, we strongly recommend that rabbis who are rendering decisions for their laity on this matter demonstrate a strong predisposition to accept the halakhic view of the Gedolei HaPoskim who define the moment of halakhic death to be that of brainstem death, or that they refer their laity to rabbis who do so. I just heard, where did I hear that story of someone, was that some other issue? Somebody asked a shaila, and the rabbi said, don't ask me, ask that person, because he's going to give you a different answer. That's like a better answer for your situation. It wasn't this issue, it was something else.
I think Eitan's dad told her something about that.
Yeah. About
elevators, yeah, she told her to ask you.
I guess I'm honored.
Sorry. That's really funny.
This was not the example I had in mind, but there was a very moving story. I think about Shlomo Zalman Auerbach or something, who was asked a shaila, and he said, why ask you this shaila? There's maybe somebody else said it about, there's a great posek in Yerushalayim, and this is his name, and go ask him this question. Because, it was an abortion shaila, that's what. It was Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was asked an abortion shaila, and he said, "Don't ask me this question. Like, you should be asking this question to Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Waldenberg. Okay, Rav Waldenberg is a great posek who lives in Yerushalayim. You should not be asking this question, asking that question. So that's like interesting, right? It's sort of, I have my, principles. I have my understanding of this topic. I see pragmatically how a different approach can be like helpful and like lead to like really positive outcomes. So like ask them the question. Don't ask me, ask them. I don't know.
So it's not a matter of expertise, you're saying?
So it's interesting, right? It's sort of like it's also a matter of expertise. Like it's
Like, because some people will say, like, I'm not the right person to ask, like, for
Or is it that you
detailed thing,
see
like,
your own biases and you don't want that to influence how you're actually answering?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I think it's hard. Like I don't have expertise, but I know what the experts say, and so right. So it's sort of hard to pretend. Once you know that, it's hard to you can't forget that knowledge, right? So I mean, like the trivial case the story I always tell is my friend who went to yeshiva after high school and in Israel, and there were. Like he's there in Elozman, he wants to know should he keep one day of Yom Tov or 2 days of Yom Tov because he's an American visiting Israel, the classic question okay? And there are 2 Rosh Yeshiva at his yeshiva at the time, and they have different opinions on this question. And he knows what they say because everyone knows, because like everyone knows what the Rosh Yeshiva says about this like really obvious question that everyone asks like their first like month in yeshiva. So he wants to do the right thing and ask the experts. He wants to ask his Rosh Yeshiva this like really important shaila, but he knows the answer he's going to get depending on which one he asks. So like you want to defer to experts, but we know if we know what they're going to say, it's very hard to do that. So I think
I meant more like in a complicated situation.
Oh,
Like if someone, like if someone's like particularly knowledgeable in like halacha, medical ethics.
Sure.
It's a complicated issue. You would like want to ask someone that has like expertise in medical ethics as opposed to someone that just knows like general.
For sure, but in reality, like
But
the people who
that's not
get
what you're referring
yeah,
to.
because I think in reality, like the people who are going to get these questions are going to be the rabbis who know that. Right? It's going to be like the congregational rabbis, like on the ground, like who are going to be like there in the hospital with these grieving families, in the ICU room, and they're like, what do we do? Do we donate the organs or not? So those rabbis or those whoever they ask, it could be they're from cousins, whoever they call on the phone, they can appropriate to refer to somebody else if they haven't dealt with this question before. But who are they going to ask? So this is saying ask the people who are going to,
It's slightly different, I think, when the experts refer you to someone else versus you say shopping for an opinion. I mean, that means that among the experts there has to be some kind of mutual respect for the other rabbis, knowledge and, their
so you're saying when like laity, when like people, it's like Shiloh shopping, I'm going to shop it around to get the best answer I can get, as opposed to when rabbis consult with others, that's like more respectful. It's like, it's so interesting to me that they're saying like,
No, but
yeah.
not respectful of the rabbi. But I mean, like as a halachic authority, they must have some kind of level of respect for each other, even with differing opinions.
Yes, that's right.
I'm not talking about the respect of the
I
person
see.
asking
Yeah.
the question, but
Right, we're colleagues, we're all Tzaddik Chachamim, we all read each other's Svarim and whatever, we all write letters to each other, so I know, so I can refer, but at that level they probably are really convinced that they're each right, so they might not be so differential.
the fact that but the fact that he would recommend that somebody else
Yes.
ask,
Yes.
get
Yeah.
their opinion
Yes.
means that even if he disagrees, he sees some level
Correct.
of,
Yeah.
truth
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
acceptance in that.
That's why it's a beautiful story. It's an uncommon beautiful story, right? It's not how usually the world doesn't work that way. But I agree. Okay. It's interesting. I think it's really interesting. It's also raises like how does halakha work? Like what's the role of our own like moral intuition, our own pragmatic, our own like sense of the world and what works and what's helpful and what's not, and how much judgment we have. I mean, not about any question, right? Like we're all experts in our own lives. We all have that kind of expertise, and so when you're like trying to get guidance about halakha, so we don't have that expertise ourselves. So we want to like refer to someone who's a little more knowledgeable up the chain a little bit, but I guess we should do that in a way that like honors our values and honors like somebody who like understands, so it has to be like a common, right? So,
Were you saying the abortion story because like he was referring to someone who might be more sympathetic to the family's cause? question?
He was referring to somebody who had a published, known position that was fairly lenient in permitting abortions under various situations of like tragic, circumstances of like fetal different,
And like he did not have a known published position.
The person who was asked the question, I think, was much more restrictive against abortion, and that I think was his stated position. But somehow he was touched by the pathos of the person asking the question, and he was like, this question should be asked from someone who's going to give you it. I can't give that answer because I don't believe it. But like he's a great tzaddik and he believes that it's the correct answer. You should ask him. It's good, right? It's an interesting. It's
I also see that the person asking the question wasn't necessarily his typical question.
Yeah, I don't know. There's another version of this. They say, from Chaim Brisker, they say that he would never.
You would assume that they would know that he took a more conservative approach.
Maybe they didn't know. They may not have known. Chaim Brisker, there's a story that he once he answered some question about also like a very fraught question about like an aguna that he was going to, he sent the question to, I think, like the rabbi of he was like a yeshiva, but there was like also a rabbi in the town. So he sent the question to the rabbi of the town, like, you're the rabbi of the town, it's your authority to like decide this case. Tell me the answer and I'll honor it because you're the rabbi of the town. Just don't tell me why. If you tell me why, I'll have to like argue with you because I won't be convinced. And like, you tell me why, I can't let that stand, okay? But just tell me the answer, like, I'll just respect your authority. That's also like I don't know, it's sort of like, it's sort of a way.
Very halachic.
It's like, well, there's a space for like for my own integrity, my intellectual integrity. I'm going to say the truth, and there's a space for like this is an outcome that like the world needs. There's also a kind of truth. It's like a pragmatic truth, and is separate. There's a textual truth, and then there's a pragmatic truth. There's the truth of like, another like why do we say again like a little bit far afield, but when we say. Ketzim Raktim Fnei HaKala, okay, right, the dispute between Hill and Shammai, right, what do we say to a bride? So Shammai says, what do we say to a bride according to Beit Shammai?
If somebody asks you, is this bride pretty, like you say...
Beit Shammai says, Kala Kamochi, you just call it like you see it, like just that's,
like you say, she's tall, or she's like whatever.
Beit Shammai says, Kala Kamochi, Beit Hillel says,
Like
she says, great personality, right, she's like, great personality, very rich parents, so, Beit Hillel says Kala Na'ev Chasuda, but there's also, it's not that Beit Hillel, it's not that Beit Hillel is saying you should lie. He's saying, well, she, at some level, certainly in the eyes of her husband, she is, Na'ev Chasuda, or she is, she's found great, right? So it's like it's sort of a deeper truth. There's the truth of like, the subjective, how she is seen hopefully in the eyes of her husband. There's also the truth of like kindness and solidarity and people being nice to you. That's also kind of truth. So that's okay. Let's move on. I don't want to. Okay. 3. But yeah, sorry. Yeah,
just because I genuinely don't know, when it says here, organs may be removed for transplantation under strict halachic supervision and guidance, is that what's practiced? When we do organ donation today,
I think.
overseen by a rabbi. Is that
the rabbi's not like there when they're like cutting open the person, but I think is appropriate to consult a rabbi before sort of giving over permission to harvest organs. And I think the rabbi should have the ability to like talk to the medical team and ascertain that like that they've maybe there's an extra round of tests that the rabbi might want, they might accommodate that, or certainly to talk to a nurse or physician about the stat. Right? You've seen that.
But it's not common practice for the rabbi to oversee.
No, we say oversee. I don't think oversee means like the rabbi's there. That's good. Yeah, because it's not like at the butcher shop. He's not like there in the room. Like it's not. Right. It's not like much. That's the thing. I mean, there's some people do that. There's some fertility clinics where they have a rabbi supervising, but that's.
Based on the wording of this.
Yeah, but not for working. No, the rabbi's not there on the.
I know in Israel when you sign any, you can mark yourself as a religious individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll have basically like what I guess you do for religious families. Like the rabbi will approve that the person is dead or not before you can.
Yeah, so you can. In America, generally, I think because it's the right of the family to offer to do this or not. Like and the transplant team really wants the family to agree. They'll generally accommodate. Like I need my rabbi to like just approve this. That's general. And you should fill out a halachic medical directive where you say like that they have documents and you can happy to provide. It says I'm a religious Jew. I want decisions made about me to be in accordance with Jewish law, and I want this rabbi to be the person you call to determine what Jewish law said. And if you can't reach him, here's the person I want you to call. And like that's, you should sign that, and you could, and more important than signing it is make sure that your loved ones know that you signed it, and that they know, and that's like totally fine. And then the medical system generally will accommodate that.
They usually sign this type of document.
They sign hopefully before it's ever needed, like sign it tonight.
Yeah.
Stick it in your, yeah.
It's never too soon.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have you guys, within your experience, have you guys had situations where there's a rabbi and he's sort of a religious figure involved
Yes.
in the actual end, once they make the decision to donate? How-
Yeah, I haven't seen it in Chicago, but in New York, yes. And in the decisions to not escalate care, and this is the goal that we're trying to work out.
Once they already decided it, so, not really, no, but seriously, it's totally separate. Like the donor team and the people that take care of the donor and make the donor decisions, and the transplant team is not involved in the conversation about whether they want to donate their organs. It's completely separate. The transplant team's job only starts once the person's in the operating room to take the organs out. And they do that for obvious ethical conflict of interest reasons. So, and the person that's talking to them about the initial conversation is usually the neuro people, determining brain death. And then there's a third party that comes from it's called, in Chicago it's called Gift of Hope, where it's an organ procurement organization, they have them all over the country. And there's an assigned person that comes and talks to them about it and consents them, and they're working with the donor team. It has nothing to do with the transplant team until they're
And literally from a paper that I read today, if the organ procurement officer has that conversation with the family as their first point person, they are significantly unlikely to agree to organ donation. So it should not be someone from the organ
Oh, I
donation.
see. Right. Yeah.
It should be someone from the
Yeah.
But
Right, it feels like you're.
usually they have it first and then they call them and say
Right.
this patient
Right.
is appropriate, come.
Okay. Thank you for this. These are really valuable insights you're sharing. Okay. 3, even as we adopt the brainstem definition of death, we emphasize that the greatest of care is needed in applying this definition in practice, and that safeguards are necessary to ensure the organ removal is done in accordance with the halachic principles. Each person should consult with his or her rabbi and appropriate medical professionals to understand how this determination of death is made and how to ensure the appropriate procedures will be in place. Okay, I think, right? So that's what we've just been talking about. 4, rabbis and laity who follow the position that brain death is not considered to be halachic death should be aware that it's medically possible to donate certain body parts after cardiac death, and that it's a mitzvah to do so, right? This is, Ali, we were talking about this last time, right? There are, certain organs like kidneys, maybe corneas, right? Certain things can be donated after somebody is dead according to Kol Deo, and that should certainly be done. Thus, A, it is both halachically permissible and desirable and ethically mandated for every Jew to be an organ donor consistent with his or her definition of halachic death. Okay, so everyone can donate some organs, or at least volunteer, right? And so you could say, if you're not willing to accept the brainstem definition of death, at least be a kidney donor, because that could also save 2 lives. Rabbis and community leaders must do all in their power to communicate this responsibility to their community and to encourage all Jews to sign organ donor cards in line with their halachic definition of death. Okay, fine, that's great. And then this is the part. This ended up being very controversial. I think it's powerful. I think it seemed okay to adopt a restrictive position regarding donating organs and a permissive position regarding receiving organs is morally untenable. Such an approach is also highly damaging to the state of Israel, both internally and in regards to its relationship with the larger world, and to the Jewish people as a whole. This approach must thus be unequivocally rejected by Jews at the individual and the communal level. To me, that seems very basic. This was very controversial when this was published. People saw it as an attack on those communities and those poskim who come to this position. And you can see how it, from a lot, again, as I just articulated before, it sort of sees the logical, I don't know, it's a machloket, let's be safe, we're not going to, harvest the organs, and then, it's a machloket, so of course we'll sign up to be on the organ donor list. It makes sense. I would say if you can't imagine not putting yourself on the recipient list in great need, then you have to be willing to donate as well. It just seems, I agree it's morally untenable. It can't be that we're going to, as a community, we're going to sign up to receive organs, but we're not going to be willing to donate them. I feel like if brainstem death is good enough to receive organs, then it's good enough to give them.
Are there still halachic stances that you can't accept organs?
Well, I think if you don't believe in brainstem, like how would you? So
No, I'm saying accept an organ.
So how could you accept it if it's murdering the recipient? You're benefiting from. So you
I
could
mean,
say,
they're going to anyways. It's just going to go to someone else.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay. So that would be the position. I would say I think it would be. So that you're right. They're dead anyway. Like so just because just because and it's totally separate, right? So we don't know who they are. We don't know what they're so they're dead anyway. You might as well take the organ rather than go to somebody else. But if I'm not willing to give in that same circumstance.
No, I understand
right.
that issue, but I just was wondering. I just didn't realize that there was people that.
I have heard of communities or into post-human, I don't remember, who won't receive organs based on this sort of consistency. I think it is very rare. It's like pretty.
I've never heard of that.
I think it's kind of heroic, honestly, but it's consistent in a way that is.
Right, like you're holding by your stand.
Yeah, like I'm willing to die rather than be complicit in this system, which I think is deeply problematic. So it's just I think very few people. Sorry.
Jewish communities.
I think so. I can look it up, but
Definitely
yeah. I mean, I think it's not very common, and it seems very hard to imagine it being many people who would do that if their life is in danger. So therefore, I think we just sort of really have to then kind of come up with some argument, whether it's brainstem death or some other, some way of leading to accepting brainstem death and therefore donating as well. Because I think it seems really just icky to as a community, we sign up to, now it happens, the Orthodox community is very good, we give a lot of kidneys, so that's very nice. So in that way we're contributing, but I don't know that quite is good enough if we're not also giving hearts and livers and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. Somebody was had a conversation some months ago with somebody who was bothered that Jewish law doesn't allow us to donate our bodies to medical research. And she had always wanted to do that. That seemed like a really meaningful thing to do, and she really wanted to do that. And she was really discouraged when she learned that Jewish law doesn't. So I said to her, Jews have done a lot for the practice of medicine. It's okay. This is one thing we don't do, but we've done overall we do a lot. I just feel of all the spheres of human endeavor, medicine is one where thank God we've done more than our share. It's okay if we can't do this one thing. But I don't know. I'm not so concerned about that piece of it. But I think when it comes to being an organ donor, I think we do have to step up and do what we can.
Well, why can't you?
Why can't you? Oh, because it's considered. It's considered nivel hamet, right? It's a mitzvah. Yeah, it's a mitzvah to bury. So pikuach nefesh. Generally, we have a very concrete, narrow framework for determining pikuach nefesh. If there's somebody who, so you would do medical research, you could do an autopsy if you're going to find the murderer and lock him up. You can do the autopsy if the sibling might have the same genetic condition. We want to figure out what it is and find a treatment to save this person. But just doing it for advancing science is not considered enough of a pikuach nefesh situation, even though.
To me, that's the same exact thing. You're taking all the medical research about all the people that are donating their brains and their bodies, and you're using that to save all the Jewish people's lives, but you're not willing to give your life to do that.
So if there was ever enough of a real severe shortage where medical science was being impeded because there weren't enough bodies being donated, and it would make a difference if Jews. So maybe there'd be I don't know. People contribute in different ways. I don't know that everyone has to donate their body. I feel somehow.
But I feel people can make the exact same argument for organ donation. Then you can say
research trials about anything, whether it's organ donation or not. Why should we be involved in trials if nothing's proven?
Right.
Plenty of other people that can do it. Jews don't have to donate their bodies either.
Yeah. It seems to be a difference of degree, right? That this person. Their heart can, because with the organ donation, if we declare this person an organ donor, we can save 8 lives, and we can name those 8. They're here. There are 8 people who are on the brink of death, and we can save their lives with this one brain dead patient, which is different from I'm going to donate my body to science and it'll contribute to medical knowledge somehow, right? In some more abstract way.
So you can't name 4 medical students that are gonna, dissect your body, but that is very.
Yeah, look,
and it's also less questionable because you're completely dead.
Yeah.
Like meaning, like I don't almost understand like the organ donation thing
We
more.
wanna be
Because like
buried,
there's
yeah,
halachic like
yeah.
questions. It's like once you're totally dead and your body's just gonna turn to dirt.
I think this, I would put all of this in general, like sort of whether, this is whatever, if I ever have time, I don't know, sabbatical or something, or I'd like to research like statistical thinking in halakha. Statistical thinking, which is like something I'm kind of interested in, like sort of explore, because it seems to be, you're basically saying it is pikuach nefesh, it's just not, you just can't identify the person, but statistically, if, 1,000 Jews donate their bodies, it will save lives. It's just not one person we can identify. And statistical thinking, we think very statistically, I think it's a modern way of thinking. I read some chapter in a book once about a court case where they proved a forgery by showing that this woman, somebody changed her will and gave all her money to whatever this crook. Okay, they proved in court that the signature on this will was a forgery because they identified, like some graphologist identified her signature and compared it to another signature they thought he had copied it from, and showed that like it was identical to this other signature in like 17 different ways that she varied her signature over the course of a collection of her signatures. It couldn't have been replicated. Right? You understand, right? You have like 20 samples of her signature. It's different in like 17 places, and you see all the different variables. And these two are identical, right? That's statistically impossible. It would be right exactly. So it must have been a forgery because we have look at these 20 examples of her signature, and only these two are identical in all these ways, and the others aren't. So that makes sense to us, right? Because we, but
like they're within halacha.
But at the time, in the 19th century, this was a huge controversy, and the case was overturned. Okay? Because it was like at the cusp of that, like thinking statistically. So I think we think statistically. So I think we're inclined to see how, if we make a shift into some halachic policy, it will lead to, why don't we allow building public transportation on Shabbat? If we build public transportation on Shabbat.
It's not so simple that it's not allowed.
Okay, because
Building?
Because, I know it is having fights.
They don't,
Already block everything.
yeah, we're gonna build
The
it.
argument is that there are more people on the road when that's happening during the week. The odds of collisions is higher and more people might die. So it's not, that's also about like donating the bodies for research.
So I think
there are
that's,
some that say that
so
it's
if we finish this, we're building a train line, we finish the train line, we work on Shabbat, we'll finish it, 1/7 earlier. That means that people get the train 1/7 early, start operating, and fewer traffic accidents because we'll have the train. So I think there's sort of also interesting things that you could follow through with Pikuach Nefesh if we're thinking statistically.
But
Also,
what is the
there
halachic
isn't-
issue? Desecrating the body after your
Yeah. The body is the mitzvah to bury, and there's a prohibition against desecrating a body, and there's also a prohibition against getting benefit from a cadaver, getting hana from a mate. So all of those things can be overridden for Pikuach Nefesh, but not
Wait.
necessarily for.
Is benefit and hana, is that the same?
Is learning about it, hana? Yeah, I don't know. That's probably not forbidden, but like any other practical benefit, if you would use it for like some, you're going to use it to make some sort of, I don't know,
We can get really gross here.
emulsify the whatever to make a thing. Like that would be hana.
I
that
mean,
would
if
be
you want to
prohibited,
feel better about it, not donating your body, the regulation of what happens to donated bodies in America is incredibly poor.
Yeah, they're not necessarily all used for like cutting edge medical education. Some
Right,
of them are,
yeah.
Could end up as whatever. High school classroom, as you discussed. We should wrap, yeah.
This is a question that goes on, because I might have missed.
Yeah.
Is the position that one is not allowed to donate their body, period? Because I think that it's not so clear that that's the case.
I think that the standard position is that maybe I'm sure there are other. I'm only aware of the restrictive position. You can't donate your body for.
It is really because it depends on for what is it used for. There are arguments that say
It could be.
that you can't train doctors without it, so you need it. Also, if a person died from a specific disease.
If you can do it, if someone died, if there's a reason, if there's a need for a specific, that's obviously like nefesh. If there's an actual thing we have to learn that we can save somebody who's.
Even still, that's statistics, because you might not be able to figure it out.
No, but if you think there's a chance that you could, that's Pikuach Nefesh also, you know what I mean? But it's different, as opposed to just I'm gonna just donate to science in a more broad way, which is generally is condemned. Yeah, so yeah. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that returning from driving home from the hospital on Shabbat. It's another example I always think of, right? Like if you be more lenient, of course you can go to the hospital on Shabbat and if you hop in a car and drive. What can you go home? So maybe going home makes it more likely that you'll. We want to incentivize people going when they have. No, we want to incentivize people going when they need to. So we'll let them go home so that they'll be You know, the early tshuvas of the doctors can drive home because they need to be by their telephones so they can get the next call. That's not really relevant anymore, but maybe if they go home, then they're going to be, they'll be rested, you know, but also like if you imagine, I think statistically, if you call your doctor, it's like, I don't feel so good, I have a chest pain, you know, so we want the doctors to say, when appropriate, go to the emergency room, I'll meet you there in 20 minutes and we'll check you out, right, or you know, and we don't want the doctor to be thinking, if I tell them that, it's like, you know, 7 p.m. on a Friday, you know, and I'm going to have to spend the next, you know, 22 hours, you know, like in the hospital, right? You know, so like, we want the doctor to just like be giving really good, you know, so that's another example. I think maybe statistically, you know, you could see it as like they're making it more pleasant for the physicians and for the patients to like seek medical, you know, this is like, I don't know, I'd like to research this one day if I had, you know, have the time. I think it's an interesting area of like seeing how statistical thinking like can or cannot, you know, influence a lot of that. All right, we've got a little farther. I want to pause at least the camera so people who need to leave can leave. I'm happy to keep schmoozing about all of this. We've got a little bit far afield. Yeah, of course. So what would closing? Look, I signed the statement because you know, a lot of my teachers signed it. I sort of agree basically with what it says. I think there's always, I don't know, something like. I think, you know, the brainstem criterion, I think, are halachically sound. I think they are in line with the Talmudic precedent. I think they make sense medically and scientifically today. I understand why it's sort of why people are resistant, because somebody who's like, you see their chest going up and down and they're warm and they look alive and they feel alive, you know, it's sort of hard to see them as dead. I get that. I think that should be honored. I think that's like a feeling that comes from a good place and has a productive role in like keeping us ethical, but ultimately, I think both the pragmatic arguments and the halachic arguments are really sort of pretty solid on the side of endorsing brainstem death, notwithstanding like whatever ethical challenges that the future brings, you know, from technology. So I just wanted to sort of end with that, but happy we can choose more after we turn off the camera. Thank you.